As my daughter, Lisa, stood in the hallway of the apartment I had helped turn into her home, her face was a mask of cold fury. "We've been over this," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held for me. "We're struggling, and frankly, Mom, you're an extra mouth to feed." The words, so clinical and cruel, hung in the air between us, sharper than any knife. She was kicking me out, reducing my existence to a line item on her budget. She and her husband, Tom, stood there, a united front of youthful impatience, waiting for the old burden to finally remove itself. They had no idea. They had no idea that for the past 20 years, the little hobby she always mocked, my quiet, disciplined ritual of managing the investment portfolio my late husband had taught me to build, had steadily grown into a silent, formidable fortune. As I picked up the single, worn suitcase I had packed, containing the meager remains of my life with them, I kept my face a blank canvas of hurt. I stayed quiet. I let them believe they had all the power. Because as I walked out the door, the only thought in my head was a cold, clear, and astonishing fact: I had more than enough money to buy not just their apartment, but the entire building they lived in. Before that cold, final pronouncement, my life had been a landscape of quiet, willing servitude, painted in the muted colors of sacrifice. My world was the two-bedroom apartment that belonged to Lisa and Tom, but my presence was the engine that made it run. My alarm would go off at 5:30 a.m., long before the sun had a chance to climb over the neighboring buildings. The first hour of my day was a silent ballet of domesticity, emptying the dishwasher from the night before, grinding the expensive coffee beans Tom insisted on, packing a lunch for my 8-year-old grandson, Leo, making sure to cut the crusts off his sandwich just the way he liked. I was the home's invisible foundation, the unpaid nanny, chef, and housekeeper, a role I had slipped into after my husband, Mark, passed away and I sold my own small house to help the kids out. The apartment itself, while stylishly decorated by Lisa, always felt like their territory. My room, the smaller of the two, was neat and impersonal. The living room was dominated by their things: Tom's oversized television, Lisa's expensive art prints, Leo's sprawling universe of toys. My own life had been condensed into a few photo frames on my nightstand and the small, worn ledger I kept in my drawer. I moved through their space with a quiet deference, always careful not to be in the way. Their gratitude was a currency dispensed in small, almost unnoticeable coins. A distracted "Thanks, Mom," from Lisa as she rushed out the door, her eyes glued to her phone. A grunt of approval from Tom if the pot roast was particularly good. They weren't overtly cruel, not then. They were simply consumed by their own lives, their own ambitions, their own constant, simmering financial stress. I became a part of the furniture, a reliable appliance that produced clean laundry and warm meals. I told myself this was what a family was. This was the price of not being alone. Their money problems were a constant, humming background noise in the apartment. They both had decent jobs in the city, but their expenses always seemed to outpace their income. There were hushed, tense conversations over bills at the end of the month, arguments about a vacation they couldn't afford, complaints about the ever-increasing rent. I would sit in my armchair, pretending to read, my heart aching for them, feeling a familiar pang of guilt for being a financial drain, even as I handed over the bulk of my monthly Social Security check to Lisa for groceries. It was during one of these tense evenings that Lisa noticed me at my small desk, updating my ledger. "I don't know why you waste time with that stock market game, Mom," she'd said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's like a fantasy world. It's not real money. Not like the bills we have to pay." I just smiled faintly and didn't argue. She had no understanding of it, and I had long ago given up trying to explain. That little hobby was the last true piece of my husband I had left. Mark had been a planner, a man who believed in security above all else. He wasn't a gambler, he was a gardener of money. Years ago, he had sat with me, patiently explaining the magic of compound interest, of slow, steady investments in boring, reliable index funds. "This isn't a game, Carol," he had told me, his hand covering mine on the worn kitchen table of our old house. "This is our security. This is our independence. No matter what happens, you will never be a burden to anyone." After he died, I continued the ritual. Every month, without fail, I'd invest a small, disciplined amount. It was my secret comfort, a connection to him, a quiet act of self-reliance that existed outside of my role as their live-in helper. In their eyes, I was a financially naive widow. In my secret ledger, I was the keeper of my own independence, a fact I never thought I would need to use. The anchor point of my delusion, the moment my sacrifice was met with the most telling indifference, came last winter. My grandson, Leo, was growing like a weed and needed a new winter coat. The one from last year was tight at the shoulders, the sleeves too short. Lisa and Tom had been putting it off. "They're just so expensive for something he'll grow out of in a year," Lisa had sighed, scrolling through her phone as we sat in the living room one evening. The next day, I saw Leo shivering at the bus stop. That was all it took. I took him to a proper department store that weekend. His eyes lit up at the sight of a thick, dark blue parka, the kind with a fur-lined hood and deep pockets for treasures. The price tag made me catch my breath. It was nearly half of my monthly Social Security check, money I carefully budgeted for my medications and personal needs. But seeing the look of pure joy on Leo's face as he snuggled into the coat, a warmth spread through my own chest that had nothing to do with the store's heating. When we got home, he ran to his mother, proudly showing off his new armor against the cold. Lisa looked up from her laptop, a brief, distracted smile on her face. "Oh, that's great, Mom. You saved us a trip," she said, her attention already drifting back to a work email. There was no real gratitude, no acknowledgement of the financial sacrifice I had just made. I had solved a problem, checked a box on her to-do list. The warmth I had felt in the store slowly chilled. I had given a piece of my own security for her child's comfort, and it was noted with the same emotional investment as me taking out the trash. Still, I pushed the feeling down. I told myself that Leo was warm. That was all that mattered. I continued to live in my false peace, a peace I had paid for, time and time again. The first sign of the coming earthquake was a single, innocuous piece of mail. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, addressed not to any of us, but simply to current resident. It had a professional, vaguely threatening look to it, bearing the logo of a large, unfamiliar property management group. I was the one who brought the mail in that afternoon, and my fingers trembled slightly as I placed it on the granite countertop in the kitchen. I had a feeling, a cold premonition that coiled in the pit of my stomach, that this envelope contained more than just a notice. It contained our future. The atmosphere in the apartment that evening was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. The letter sat on the counter like an unexploded bomb. When Lisa and Tom came home from work, their usual weary chatter was replaced by a heavy silence the moment they saw it. Tom picked it up, his brow furrowed, and slid it open with a finger. Lisa leaned over his shoulder, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the edge of the counter. I watched from the doorway of the kitchen, pretending to stir a pot of soup, my body rigid with apprehension. I didn't need to hear them read it aloud. I could see it in their faces. I saw Tom's jaw tighten, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. I saw Lisa's face, already strained from a long day, crumble into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "They sold the building," Tom said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Effective immediately. The new owners are some corporate entity. Westwood Properties." "What does it say about the leases?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp, brittle. Tom scanned the page. "All current leases are under a 90-day review. It says to expect adjustments to reflect current market rates." He tossed the letter onto the counter as if it were contaminated. "We all know what that means. They're going to jack up the rent. Sky high." That single letter was the spark that lit the fuse. The argument that followed was unlike any I had ever witnessed between them. It wasn't their usual bickering over trivial things. This was a raw, ugly fight, born from the terror of two people who had built a lifestyle on a foundation of debt and denial. They were standing on a cliff's edge, and the ground was crumbling beneath their feet. I tried to make myself invisible, retreating to my armchair in the corner of the living room, the book in my lap a useless prop. But their voices filled every corner of the apartment, sharp and accusatory. "I told you we should have saved more, Lisa." Tom's voice rose. "But no, you had to have the new SUV, the organic groceries, the $500 haircut." "Oh, this is my fault?" Lisa shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What about your golf club membership? Your boys' weekends? What about the promotion you were so sure you were going to get last quarter? We're in this mess together, Tom." They tore into each other, dissecting their shared financial life, each purchase, each decision, now a weapon to be used against the other. I sat there, a silent spectator at the ugly autopsy of their marriage, feeling my own heart ache with their pain and fear. I wanted to say something, to comfort them, to tell them we would figure it out together, as a family. But I knew my words would be meaningless. I was part of the problem. My presence, my very existence, was a line item in their overstretched budget. Finally, the fight reached its peak. Lisa, her face flushed and her eyes wild with the cornered animal's desperation, ran out of arguments to throw at her husband. And so, she turned her fury on the easiest, most defenseless target in the room. She turned on me. It started with a look. A long, cold, calculating stare that made me feel like a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep or discard. "You know," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, all the shouting gone, replaced by something far more cruel. "Things would be a lot easier if we didn't have so many expenses." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom, to his eternal shame, looked down at his shoes, refusing to meet my pleading gaze. He was a coward, and in his cowardice, he was her accomplice. "Lisa, I help out," I said, my voice a frail whisper. "My social security, it goes straight to the groceries, you know that. I can give more, I can." "More?" She let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded nothing like my daughter. "Mom, your check barely covers the coffee Tom drinks. The real issue is the space. The resources." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet piercing, whisper. "Tom and I were talking. If we have to, you know, downsize our lives. It's not fair that we're the only ones making sacrifices." And then came the words. The words that would be seared into my memory forever, the final, brutal severance of the bond I thought was unbreakable. "Maybe," she said, her eyes as hard as pebbles, "if we didn't have to feed an extra mouth, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place." An extra mouth. The phrase struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a grandmother. I was a mouth. A liability. A parasitic presence in her perfect, curated life. I looked at her, searching for any flicker of the girl I had raised, any hint of remorse for the cruelty she had just inflicted. There was none. There was only the cold, hard logic of a problem that needed to be solved. "We could rent out your room, Mom," she continued, her voice now practical, as if she were discussing a business plan. "We could probably get $1,000 a month for it. That would make all the difference. You understand, right? It's just math." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at her, my heart shattering into a million pieces. "I'll help you look for a senior's residence," she said, the false kindness in her voice more painful than the cruelty. "You have a week. We need to get the room listed online as soon as possible." The verdict had been delivered. My own daughter had sentenced me to exile. I stood up from my chair, my bones feeling ancient and brittle. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. What was the point? The woman standing before me was a stranger. I walked to my room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I pulled out the single, worn suitcase from the top of my closet. My hands moved with a slow, methodical numbness as I packed. Not everything. Just the essentials. A few changes of clothes. My medications. The small, framed photo of Robert from my nightstand. And the old, worn ledger where I tracked my little hobby. When I was done, I walked out into the living room. Lisa was already on her laptop, no doubt searching for rental listings. Tom was staring blankly at the television. Neither of them looked at me. I placed my key to the apartment on the small table by the door. The soft click of the metal on the wood was the only sound. Then, I turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I just left. I stood alone in the dimly lit, anonymous hallway, the suitcase in my hand feeling impossibly heavy, a complete and utter stranger to the family I had just been excommunicated from. My life with them was over. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sterile, dimly lit hallway with a dreadful finality. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand still clutching the handle of my worn suitcase, the two black trash bags of my life slumped at my feet. I could hear the faint sound of the television inside the apartment, a jarring note of normalcy in a moment that felt like the end of the world. They had already moved on. Their lives were continuing, uninterrupted, on the other side of that door. I was the only one left standing in the wreckage. I rode the elevator down in a silent, suffocating haze. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable from 3B, got on at her floor, her arms full of groceries. She gave me a cheerful "Hello, Carol," before her eyes traveled down to my suitcase and the trash bags. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confused pity. "Moving out?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. I could only nod, unable to form words, the shame burning a hot track up my neck. I felt her pitying gaze on me the rest of the way down, and it was almost worse than Lisa's anger. I wasn't a person anymore, I was a sad story, a piece of neighborhood gossip in the making. Once outside, the city air, thick with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes, felt foreign and hostile. I stood on the pavement, aimless, as people bustled past me, their faces set with purpose. They all had somewhere to go. I had nowhere. The thought of calling one of my old friends, of having to explain the humiliating truth of what my own daughter had done, was unthinkable. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, forcing my gaze to the cracked and broken sidewalk. I was a failure, and I couldn't bear for anyone I knew to witness it. After what felt like hours of wandering, my legs aching, I found a place. It wasn't even a proper motel, just a tall, grim-looking building with a small, hand-painted sign that read weekly rentals. The landlord, a sallow-faced man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, took my cash without a word and handed me a key. The room was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long, dark hallway that smelled of dust and old cooking grease. It was small, barely larger than a prison cell, containing a single lumpy bed, a rickety nightstand, and a small, grimy window that looked out onto a brick wall. A single, bare bulb hung from a wire in the ceiling, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the stained walls and peeling linoleum floor. This was it. This was my new home. A place where hope came to die. The first night was an eternity of sleepless torment. I lay on the thin, scratchy mattress, staring up at the cracked plaster ceiling. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, every angry shout from a neighboring room was a fresh reminder of my utter isolation. My mind, a cruel tormentor, replayed the betrayal over and over again. I saw Lisa's face, twisted with a cold fury I had never seen before. I heard her words, echoing in the darkness. An extra mouth. The phrase was a brand on my soul, a final, brutal summary of my life's worth. I wasn't a mother, a grandmother, a source of love and comfort. I was a mouth. A liability. An expense to be cut. A wave of self-blame washed over me, so powerful it was nauseating. Where did I go wrong? Did I spoil her too much? Did I give too freely, teaching her that my love was an infinite resource with no cost? I saw her as a little girl, her face bright with joy as I presented her with a new doll, a doll I had secretly saved for months to buy. Had I been planting the seeds of her entitlement even then? The questions were a merciless interrogation with no answers, leaving me feeling hollowed out and responsible for my own demise. I pulled the small, framed photo of Robert from my suitcase and clutched it to my chest. His smiling face, so full of life and kindness, was a painful relic from another universe. "Oh, Robert," I whispered into the darkness. "What would you think of me now? I failed. I failed our daughter. I failed you." The next day was a landscape of gray, monotonous despair. Time stretched and distorted, the hours marked only by the shifting light in the grimy window. The silence in the room was a living entity, pressing in on me. I realized I hadn't spoken a word in over 24 hours. I tried to say my own name aloud, just to hear a human voice, but only a dry, raspy croak came out. The ache for my grandson, Leo, was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. I thought of his laughter, the way his small hand felt in mine. He would be wondering where I was. What had they told him? That Grandma had gone on a trip? That she didn't love him anymore? The thought of him feeling abandoned because of his parents' cruelty was a fresh and agonizing torture. Late in the afternoon, driven by a desperate need for a connection, however fleeting, I broke. I couldn't bear the silence any longer. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Jessica's contact photo, a smiling, carefree picture of her on a beach somewhere. I didn't know what I would say. I just needed to hear her voice. I needed to believe that the daughter I loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the layers of greed and cruelty. The call went straight to voicemail. The cheerful, pre-recorded message felt like a slap in the face. My heart sank. I tried to tell myself she was just busy. With a surge of desperate hope, I sent a simple text message, my fingers fumbling on the small screen. Lisa, it's Mom. Just wanted to make sure you were okay. I stared at the phone for what felt like an hour, my entire being focused on that small, dark screen, praying for a reply. Finally, it buzzed. My heart leapt. But the message that appeared was not one of remorse or concern. It was a cold, efficient dismissal. I'm busy, Mom. We're showing your old room to a potential renter this afternoon. Please don't contact me unless it's an absolute emergency. Your old room. Not my room. It had already been erased, repurposed, monetized. The finality of the message, the brutal practicality of it, was the final blow. It wasn't just that she was angry, it was that she felt nothing at all. I was a loose end she had tied up, and she was annoyed that I was still wiggling. The last bit of fight went out of me. A profound, crushing wave of defeat washed over me, so heavy I could barely breathe. I dropped the phone on the bed and curled into a ball, pulling the thin, rough blanket over my head. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in a place of utter emptiness, a void where hope and love and even pain had ceased to exist. I was a burden. A useless old woman. An extra mouth. And in that moment, in that cheap, desolate room, I finally believed it. By the morning of the third day, the tears had run dry, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. I was nothing but a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that no longer had a place for me. The storm of grief had passed, and in its wake was a terrifying calm, a profound and dangerous numbness. I lay in bed, watching the gray dawn light filter through the dirty window, tracing the patterns of the water stains on the ceiling. It would be so easy to just give up. To let the grayness inside me swallow what little was left, to simply fade away in this anonymous room. My daughter's final text message, so cold and dismissive, had been the final blow. It had extinguished the last ember of hope that the daughter I knew was still in there somewhere. I didn't have the energy to move, so I just lay there, aimlessly scrolling on my phone. It was a mindless activity, a way to numb the silence and the relentless loop of painful thoughts in my head. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting the stream of local news headlines, weather reports, and sponsored ads wash over me in a meaningless digital river. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a dramatic headline. It was a small, sponsored link at the bottom of a local news article, the kind you usually ignore. But the picture caught my eye. It was the familiar brick facade of the apartment building I had just been kicked out of. The headline read, Local Apartment Complex The Willows Hits the Market. Prime Investment Opportunity. My initial reaction was a dull, distant pang of recognition. A ghost of a pain. It felt like seeing a picture of a deceased loved one in the newspaper. The connection was there, but it belonged to another life. I almost scrolled past, to leave that world and its pain behind. But some morbid, self-punishing impulse made my thumb tap the link. The real estate listing loaded, all glossy photos and cheerful, exaggerated descriptions. Spacious units. Family-friendly neighborhood. A wonderful community. I saw pictures of the lobby, the small gym, and a generic, staged apartment with furniture far nicer than what Lisa and Tom owned, but with the exact same layout. I could see the window where my bed used to be. And then, at the bottom of the page, I saw the asking price. It was a huge, astronomical number, a figure with 2 commas that seemed to mock my entire existence. A thought, wild and unbidden, flashed through my mind, so absurd it was almost comical. I wish I could buy it. I let out a short, bitter huff of air that was almost a laugh. Don't be ridiculous, Carol, I chided myself. The grief is making you hysterical. I was a woman with $10,000 to her name, living in a roach-infested room. The idea was pure fantasy. But the thought, once planted, refused to leave. It started a chain reaction, making me think about money, about security, about my money. And that, in turn, triggered a memory of Robert. I could almost hear his voice, patient and steady, as he sat with me at our old kitchen table 20 years ago, a stack of financial pamphlets between us. He had drawn charts on a napkin, explaining the magic of compound interest, of slow, steady investments in boring, reliable index funds. It was right after he'd had his first health scare. "This isn't a game, Carol," he had told me, his hand covering mine. His hands were always so warm. "This is our security. This is our independence. I'm not going to be around forever, and I need to know that no matter what happens, you will never, ever be a burden to anyone. This will be your secret. Your strength." Lisa had always mocked it. On her visits, she'd sometimes see me at my small desk, updating the neat columns in my worn, leather-bound ledger. "Mom, I don't know why you waste time with that stock market game," she'd say with an indulgent, slightly condescending laugh. "It's like a fantasy world. It's not real money. Not like the bills we have to pay." Driven by a strange, almost detached curiosity, as if I were a scientist observing an experiment, I reached for my suitcase. At the very bottom, beneath my clothes and the photo of Robert, was the ledger. It was a habit, a ritual I had continued out of love and memory for my husband. Inside the back cover, on a yellowed sticky note, were the login details for my brokerage account. I hadn't looked at it in months. I had been too consumed with Lisa's life to tend to my own. My fingers felt clumsy on the phone's small keyboard as I typed in the web address and the complex password. I was hesitant, almost afraid of what I would see. I expected a modest sum, my security blanket, enough to find a slightly better room, perhaps, but nothing more. The page loaded. I stared at the number at the top of the screen. I blinked. I looked away, and then looked back. It couldn't be right. I had to count the digits, my finger tracing them on the screen. I had to count the commas. 1 comma. 2 commas. The number was not a small, comforting security blanket. It was a mountain. A vast, silent mountain of money, built from decades of quiet discipline and the unseen power of time. It was a figure so large it made the asking price for the apartment building look like a down payment. The realization hit me not as a gradual dawning, but as a lightning strike that jolted every cell in my body. A sharp, audible gasp escaped my lips. My hand flew to my mouth. The little hobby, the thing my daughter dismissed as worthless, was a colossal source of power. The discipline and wisdom my husband taught me, the very things my daughter saw as old-fashioned and pathetic, were my salvation. The irony was so profound, so staggering, it was almost poetic. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, the same wild, unhinged laugh from the night before, but this time it wasn't born of despair. It was born of pure, astonishing, terrible power. I sat up straight on that lumpy, sagging bed. The gray light from the window no longer seemed bleak, it seemed neutral. A blank slate. I picked up my phone and looked at the real estate listing again. I was no longer a victim looking at the tombstone of her past life. I was a predator sizing up its prey. The tears were gone. The despair was gone, burned away in an instant by this shocking revelation. In their place was a cold, hard, electrifying clarity. I was not a burden. I was not an extra mouth. I was not a foolish old woman. I was an investor. And I was about to make the acquisition of a lifetime. My plan was beautiful in its simplicity. I would do absolutely nothing that they could see. In the open, I would remain the discarded, forgotten mother. But in the shadows, I would become a force of nature. I picked up the phone from the floor. The plastic felt cool and solid in my hand, no longer a source of dread but a tool, a weapon. I didn't call the real estate agent on the listing. That would be the move of an amateur, an emotional reaction. The woman I was becoming was not emotional. She was methodical. I opened the worn leather ledger and flipped to the back page. There, in my husband's neat, precise handwriting, was a list of contacts he had trusted. Financial advisors, estate lawyers, accountants. A team he had built over a lifetime. My first call was to a name on that list, a wealth manager named Mr. Davis. My voice, when I spoke, was unrecognizable even to myself. It was firm, clear, and devoid of the quavering uncertainty of the past few days. I introduced myself as Robert Vance's widow. I did not tell him my sob story. I did not speak of my daughter or the motel. I spoke the language of business. Mr. Davis, I said, I am in control of a significant investment portfolio that has been dormant for some time. I now wish to liquidate a portion of the assets to acquire a piece of commercial real estate. Anonymously. I require your services to facilitate the liquidation and to recommend the best commercial real estate lawyer in the city. There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line, followed by a swift, professional shift in tone. The invisible, elderly woman was gone. In her place was a high net worth client. He gave me a name and number without hesitation. That afternoon marked the beginning of a quiet, intense flurry of activity. The first thing I did was use the $10,000 Jessica had given me, the irony was a constant, bitter fuel, to check out of the motel and into a clean, respectable extended stay hotel downtown. It was anonymous, comfortable, and had a desk and reliable internet. It was my new headquarters. I then went out and bought a simple, professional navy blue dress, a string of pearls, and a decent pair of leather shoes. The victim, Carol, was being retired. Mrs. Vance, the investor, was taking her place. The meeting with the lawyer, a sharp, energetic woman named Ms. Albright, took place the next day. She looked me over with a shrewd but not unkind eye as I sat opposite her in a leather chair, the skyline of the city visible through the large window behind her. I laid out my objective with the same cool detachment I had used with Mr. Davis. I want to acquire this building, I said, sliding the real estate listing across her polished desk. I want it done through a corporate entity to ensure my identity as the buyer remains completely confidential. And I want it done quickly. She studied the listing, then looked at me, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. An all-cash offer, slightly above asking, submitted through a newly formed LLC should do the trick, she said, her voice all business. It will be clean, fast, and irresistible. We can have the LLC registered by tomorrow afternoon. What would you like to name it? I thought for a moment of Robert, of his love for the steady, reliable oak trees in our old neighborhood. Let's call it Northwood Asset Management, I said. A name that was solid, boring, and utterly untraceable back to me. The days that followed were a montage of quiet, decisive power. While I was signing documents with Ms. Albright, authorizing wire transfers with Mr. Davis, and reviewing purchase agreements, I imagined what Lisa and Tom were doing. I pictured them showing my old room to prospective renters, their voices full of false sympathy. My mother had to move to a care facility, you know, it's very sad, I could almost hear Lisa saying. I imagined them celebrating, thinking they had solved their financial problems, oblivious to the tectonic shift happening right under their feet. The power they thought they had was an illusion, and the extra mouth they had so carelessly discarded was orchestrating its spectacular collapse. A week after my first call to Mr. Davis, I received a call from Ms. Albright. I was sitting at the desk in my hotel room, looking out at the city lights. Mrs. Vance, she said, a note of triumph in her voice. They've accepted the offer. No conditions. The building is yours, pending the final closing next Tuesday. A profound, quiet stillness settled over me. It wasn't the giddy rush of joy I had expected. It was the cold, clean, and deeply satisfying feeling of a complex machine, long in the making, finally clicking into place. It was the feeling of justice. Excellent, I replied, my voice even. After the closing is complete, I have one more instruction. I want you to have the new property management company issue a notice to every tenant in the building. A formal, legal notice. Of course, she said. What should it say? I looked out the window, at the endless stream of headlights flowing through the city, each one a life, a story. It should say, I began, my voice as cold and hard as steel, that all current lease agreements are terminated in 60 days. And that new leases will be offered. At triple the current rate. The trap was set. The judgment was coming. The closing happened on a Tuesday. It was a quiet, anticlimactic affair in Ms. Albright's pristine conference room. A series of signatures, a transfer of funds. Just like that, I, Carol, the discarded extra mouth, became the anonymous owner of a multi-million-dollar apartment building. I didn't feel a surge of glee. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet stillness settle over me. It was the feeling of a massive, complex machine, long in the making, finally clicking into place. The feeling of justice. As I left the lawyer's office, Ms. Albright gave me a firm, respectful handshake. The notices will be delivered to all tenants by tomorrow morning, she said. The trap was set. I spent the next day in my new, clean, temporary apartment. I wasn't waiting anxiously by the phone. I was calm. I had spent the morning at a local nursery, buying potted herbs for my windowsill. The simple act of plunging my hands into the soil, of tending to new life, felt like an act of reclaiming my own. I was reading a book when the phone finally rang in the late afternoon. It was Lisa. I looked at her picture on the screen, took a slow, deep breath, and let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was a frantic, high-pitched torrent of rage and panic. She didn't even say hello. "Mom, you will not believe what is happening," she shrieked into the phone. "It's a nightmare. The whole building is in an uproar. Some soulless corporation bought the place and they're trying to kick everyone out. They're monsters." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, a grim, humorless smile touching my lips. I remained silent, letting her pour her panic into the void. "They sent out these horrible, legal notices," she continued, her voice cracking. "Taped to everyone's door. It says all our leases are terminated in 60 days. We have the option to sign a new one, but Mom, they've tripled the rent. Tripled it. We can't afford that. Nobody can." Mrs. Gable from 3B was crying in the hallway. "The young couple in 2A are talking about having to move back in with their parents. Who does this? What kind of horrible person does this?" "Oh, that sounds terrible, dear," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of gentle, maternal sympathy. The dramatic irony was so thick, so satisfying, I could almost taste it. "Terrible? It's catastrophic," she wailed. "Tom is losing his mind. We were just starting to get ahead by renting out your old room, and now this. See? This is the kind of stress we've been under. The world is just. It's impossible. You get it now, right? Why we had to make that difficult decision. We were just trying to survive." Her attempt to justify her cruelty, to somehow make me an ally in her new misfortune, was the final, perfect confirmation of her character. She had learned nothing. "What will you do?" I asked, my voice still soft, probing gently. "What can we do?" she snapped. "We'll be homeless. I just wish I knew who this horrible new landlord was. This Northwood Asset Management. I would give them a piece of my mind. I'd tell them exactly what kind of lives they're ruining with their greed." The moment was perfect. The stage was set. The audience of one, me, was ready for the final act. I let a beat of silence hang in the air, a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then, I spoke, my voice no longer soft or sympathetic, but as cold, clear, and hard as a diamond. "You don't have to wish, Lisa," I said. "You're talking to her." The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was not empty. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the sound, all the frantic energy out of the universe. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, a ragged, hitching gasp. I could picture her, standing in the middle of her living room, her phone clutched in her hand, her face slowly draining of all color. "What?" she whispered, the single word a ghost of her former fury. "What did you just say?" "Northwood Asset Management is my company," I stated, each word precise and deliberate. "I am the owner. I bought the building. So when you say you want to give the horrible new landlord a piece of your mind, please, go right ahead. I'm listening." I heard a choked, strangled sound, and then the line went dead. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the frantic, desperate banging I had expected. It was a soft, hesitant tapping. I opened the door to find both of them standing there. Lisa and Tom. They looked pale, shaken, and utterly broken, like survivors of a terrible wreck. They stumbled inside, their eyes wide as they took in my new apartment. It was smaller than theirs, but it was clean, bright, and tastefully furnished. It was a space of dignity. A space of power. "Mom. Carol." Tom began, his voice raspy. We are so sorry." Lisa just stood there, tears streaming silently down her face, unable to speak. The arrogant, furious woman from the phone call was gone, replaced by a terrified child. "Please," Tom continued, his hands twisting together. "You can't do this to us. To Leo. We'll be on the street. We made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. Unforgivable? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I seem to recall the word you used was math. You told me it was just math. Renting out my room, getting my expense out of your budget. It was a business decision. Well, I have made a business decision, too. They both flinched. Please, Mom, Lisa finally whispered, her voice trembling. Don't do this. We'll do anything. We'll pay you back. We'll give you your old room back. The offer was so pathetic, so completely tone-deaf to the new reality, that I almost laughed. My old room? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I don't want my old room, Lisa. I am quite comfortable here. I paused, letting the full weight of the new power dynamic settle in the room. We are no longer just family. That is a privilege you threw away when you called me an extra mouth. We are now landlord and tenant. And the terms of our relationship, and your tenancy, are about to change. Drastically. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. They were not looking at their mother anymore. They were looking at their judge, their jury, and the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. The judgment had been delivered. Now, it was time for the sentencing. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. They were not looking at their mother anymore. They were looking at their judge, their jury, and the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. The judgment had been delivered. Now, it was time for the sentencing. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of my new, clean room and picked up a folder I had prepared with Ms. Albright. I sat down in the armchair, the only truly comfortable piece of furniture in the room, and gestured for them to sit on the edge of the bed. They sat, perched awkwardly like two chastened schoolchildren in the principal's office. I am not going to triple your rent, I said, my voice calm and even. The flicker of desperate hope in their eyes was immediate and pathetic. I raised a hand to silence them before they could speak. Let me be clear. This is not an act of forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that may come in time, but it has not arrived today. This is a business decision. Having my own daughter and her family evicted would be complicated. So, you will stay in apartment 4B. And you will continue to pay the original rent, not a penny more. A wave of relief so profound washed over them that Lisa almost buckled. Tom managed to stammer, "Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I'm not finished," I cut him off, my gaze hard. Your tenancy is now on a month-to-month basis, and it is contingent upon a new set of terms. This is non-negotiable. I opened the folder. First, you will both enroll in and provide me with weekly progress reports from a certified financial counseling course. You are going to learn how to live within your means. Second, you will treat me with respect. There will be no more dismissive remarks, no more sighs of impatience, no more taking me for granted. My time, my presence, and my opinions will be treated with courtesy. Third, and finally, I am no longer your default, unpaid nanny. I love my grandson more than anything in this world. But if you need me to watch Leo, you will ask me at least 48 hours in advance, as one would ask a treasured family member for a favor, not as one would expect a service that is owed. Is that understood? They both nodded mutely, their eyes downcast. They were being given a lifeline, but it was a lifeline with firm, unyielding boundaries. The old dynamic, the one of their comfort and my sacrifice, was over. Good, I said, closing the folder. Your first rent check under the new ownership is due on the 1st of the month. You may see yourselves out. A few weeks later, the penthouse apartment on the top floor of the building became available. It was the largest and most beautiful unit, with a sprawling terrace that offered a panoramic view of the city. I took it for myself. The process of moving in was a joyous act of self-creation. I didn't fill it with expensive, ostentatious furniture. I filled it with things that brought me peace, comfortable chairs for reading, a large wooden table for hosting friends I had neglected for years, and dozens of plants, turning the terrace into a lush, green sanctuary in the sky. From my new home, I was a quiet, firm presence in their lives. I was no longer the background noise in their apartment, I was the owner of their entire building. The power shift was absolute. Their behavior changed, slowly at first, then more genuinely. The financial counseling forced them to confront their habits, and the therapy I insisted they attend as a couple began to unearth the roots of their shared anxieties. Our conversations became different. Tentative. Respectful. One evening, Lisa called me. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice quiet. "I just wanted to let you know. We paid off one of our credit cards today. The high-interest one." It felt good. It was a small victory, but it was hers, and she was sharing it with me. It was the first brick in the foundation of a new, healthier relationship. My life blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. The profits from the building were substantial, but I had no desire for a life of idle luxury. Remembering the terror and hopelessness I felt in that grim, weekly rental room, I knew what I had to do. With Robert's money and my own newfound strength, I established a small foundation. The Northwood Foundation, a quiet, anonymous charity dedicated to providing emergency housing grants for seniors who find themselves in precarious situations, betrayed by family or forgotten by the system. My pain had given me a new purpose. The story ends here, but my new life is just beginning. I am writing this from my terrace, the morning sun warming my face. Below me, the city hums with life. I can see the corner of my old apartment building, and I feel no bitterness. I see my daughter and my grandson walking to the park. Lisa looks up, and for a moment, our eyes meet across the distance. She gives me a small, hesitant wave. I smile and wave back. I am no longer the extra mouth hiding in a spare room. I am the matriarch in the penthouse. I am the woman who provides shelter, stability, and second chances, not just for my own family, but for strangers, too. I am the woman my husband always knew I could be, strong, independent, and in complete control of my own world. And from up here, I can tell you, the view is beautiful.